If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
And warmer from the low, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Easton Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. Joining me in segment number 2, we're going to have one of our good friends, Eli Boettger, aboard. He does tremendous work over at HXCBB. We're going to be talking with him about a few of the coaching changes that we've seen out here in the West Coast, as we did see Stanford decide to hire on Kyle Smith. We saw Washington hire Danny Sprinkle. We did this podcast prior to Pat Kelsey getting hired on by the Louisville Cardinals, and I think that that's a solid hire. I still think that's a little bit of a wait-and-see approach, as he is inheriting a mess. I hate to say it, but Kenny Payne, man, that was not great, to say the least. But what is great is getting Eli aboard to talk about that, and then we're going to be taking a look at what we're going to be getting in the Sweet 16 with him, taking a look at a lot of these strength-on-strength matchups in the Sweet 16 in the final segment. Going to get you guys picks and analysis on the 4 Sweet 16 games that we do have for Thursday, as we do hit some bank shots. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of 2 ways we refer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @JNet_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, maybe does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way, that is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I didn't get in any Twitter/X questions today, other than when I'm going to start to really dive into the transfer portal and what we're seeing with that player movement. And answer to that is when things start to die down just a little bit, because, man, we've got like 1,000 players have already entered into the transfer portal. I think at this point, I would be better off giving you a list of guys that have not entered the transfer portal rather than guys that have. I mean, man, it is very, very lively right now, to say the least. Once things calm down and once we don't have actual games, that's when I'm going to look much more at the offseason. But right now, there's still money to be made. We've got the Sweet 16 going on today, so once we reach sort of that dead period in the final 4 games, the national title games, then I'll start really turning it forward to 2024-25. But I mean, heck, even in these smaller tournaments, there's still some money to be made. So let's take a look back at what we all saw on Wednesday. Try to find some trends and try to get to know these teams a little bit better.
Games from yesterday is Greg buzzing about. Here is the rowdy recap.
The NIT Final Four is set as Seton Hall is able to advance along with Utah. For Utah, they mopped the floor with VCU by a count of 74-54. Just nothing doing for VCU in this game. They go 5 of 26 from three-point range. Utah, they go 13 of 33 from three-point range. Davion Smith, I believe that this was his second triple-double of the NIT. He supplied the team with 15 points, 12 assists, 11 rebounds. Brandon Carlson, he was able to give the team a nice rock-solid 17 points as well. And for VCU, they didn't do a bad job in terms of the turnover battle. They played even up 13-13, but they lose the rebound battle by a count of 43-35. So a rough end for what was a VCU team that was up and down all season long, but against the spread, they were able to end the season 22-14-2 against the spread. If you took the DK Network right up pick, this was one of our easier winners of the year. Seton Hall, didn't matter your number, whether you were laying 4.5, if you got in very early, a 3.5 to a 4, if you were laying the closing 6.5. Nice, good winner here. 91-68 the final. Seton Hall goes 11 of 25 from three-point range, 10 of 11 at the free throw line. Nice double-double from Kadari Richmond. 16 points, 10 assists. Every one of these Seton Hall starters is able to get to 11-plus points. And for UNLV, they went 5 of 24 from three-point range. Off the bench, you were able to get 16 points out of Caleb Boone, and that was a lone bright spot for them. So Seton Hall, they are into the NIT Final Four. What has been a very interesting team against the spread in Seton Hall. They've had their ups and their downs. They're just 16-19 against the spread, but very nice money makers on a Wednesday. And then with regards to the finals that we saw in the CBI and the CIT, Norfolk State just storms back against Fort Wayne. If you, like me, had Fort Wayne in this one, man, you have to throw up in your mouth a little bit here. They were up 10 points at the half, and they lose 75-67. As for Fort Wayne, they go 12 of 35 from 3, and they went 10 of 27 on their 2-point shots. That was not good, to say the least. Fort Wayne actually wins the turnover battle by kind of 13-9, but for Norfolk State off the bench, they got a lot of good production as you had Jamari Thomas along with Al Mentrin combined for 20 points. Why they were coming off the bench, I have absolutely no idea, but like everyone played in this game for Norfolk State, and they found a way to be able to get the job done. And Seattle, the University of Seattle, a team that has made a Final Four in the past. It's way, way in the past, but they get it done here. 77-67 the final. Seattle got up big in this game early. They were up 27-10. High Point stormed back, but then Seattle was able to separate from there as High Point, they were a low point with their 3-point shooting, going just 4 of 24 from the outside. Meanwhile, for Seattle, Cam Tyson, he ends his college career. I think that this is his last year of eligibility with 30 big points in this one. For Seattle, they end the year 21-15 against the spread, and it was a very good year for High Point as well. High Point won 19-13-2 against the spread, so shout out to them. But if you're looking at the trends that we're right now seeing in college basketball, the over rate overall for the season still hitting at about 50.9%. 2,873 overs, 2,767 unders, with favorites sitting at a clip of 50.7% against the spread. 2,843, 2,763, and 1 under against the spread, with favorites being able to go 3-1 on Wednesday. And if you look at just the last 7 days in college basketball, this encompasses everything NCAA tournament, NIT, what have you. 39 unders, 38 overs, and a push along the way on the total, but favorites are just cleaning up. 44, 32, and 1 against the spread. So that's what we're seeing right now in college basketball, and that's what we all got on Wednesday. Now let's take a look at the Sweet 16 and some of the coaching hires that we've seen with Eli Boettger, who does great work over at HXCBB. We'll do that next, right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peters, and now a part of the Decent Family Podcast. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peters, and now part of the Beatson Family Podcast. So good to be joined by this man, Eli Boettger. He is the founder of HXCBB, doing an amazing job taking a look at this great game of basketball that we all know and love. He is very much locked in on what we're getting in the Sweet 16, Elite 8, and so much more. But on top of that, as we know, there's been a lot of coaching hires made, and he's out here in the Pacific Northwest, so he's very much knowing what's happening in the Pac-12 with regards to the hire by Stanford, with regards to Washington, making a little bit of a changing of the guard as well. And you're able to follow him on Twitter/X at his last name, Boettger. Last name is spelled Boettger _ and then Eli altogether. And it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Absolutely, Greg. Always a pleasure to hop on. I know it's a very busy time of year, whether it's NCAA tournament or otherwise. So always a pleasure to hop on and talk hoops with you.
Absolutely. It is great to have you aboard. And, well, the schools out in the Pac-12, they have found their men, which, for one, I just still will never understand why Washington and Stanford waited as long as they did to make coaching changes, and certainly we'll dive in on the Sweet 16 here in a few minutes. But Washington, about 48 or so hours ago, they hired Danny Sprinkle as their head coach, fast riser in the overall sphere of college basketball, went from Montana State to Utah State. Now he's going to be heading on over to Washington. And then we saw Kyle Smith decide that he is going to be making the move from one team that wasn't, or still is in the Pac-12 actually, to a school that is leaving the Pac-12 in Stanford. What did you make out of both of those hires? Because I thought that both Washington and Stanford, two teams that I've been critical of them not making these moves sooner, I think that they found really, really good coaches.
I agree with you. I think that they are, both Washington and Washington State could not be in more of a different scope right now. For Washington's side, you have a program that is trying to return to relevance after just years of, being outside of the bubble or having talented teams that just couldn't get the job done. Now they're hoping that Danny Sprinkle can be the guy after this most recent hire with Mike Hopkins just not going the way that at least appeared to go. The first handful of seasons were obviously very successful that led Mike Hopkins to winning 2 Coach of the Year awards, but it's definitely a change of pace. I think it's a huge obstacle ahead for Danny Sprinkle to make things work because, as you know, Washington will be joining the Big Ten, and it's a huge challenge ahead. And for Sprinkle, as great as he has been this year, obviously it's been well documented that Utah State, the job that he did this year, taking over a program that was returning 0 minutes and leading the Aggies to a 28-win season, Mountain West title, and an 8 seed in the tournament. It's pretty clearly one of the best coaching jobs in the entire country this season. But at the same time, it's still a head coach who's got 4 years of experience in the Big Sky, 1 in the Mountain West, and is now ushering in what will be a Big Ten program. So that's a very steep rise in competition. And that's not to say that Sprinkle isn't capable, because to this point, he's shown, in particular these last 3 years, that he's been very, very capable. He's done a great job with transfers. I imagine that to be the case once he gets to Washington. But it's a huge task for him ahead. But I think as far as the Kyle Smith hire at Stanford, I love this hire for many reasons. The first one being that Kyle Smith knows how to coach at a high academic institution. Obviously, he was at Columbia for 7 years and did a great job, even though he didn't turn around that program into necessarily a NCAA tournament team. But there are very different expectations at Columbia than there are at, say, Stanford and some of the previous stops that he's been at. But Kyle Smith has shown that he can turn a program around. He made San Francisco relevant. He took Washington State from the absolute depths of what they've been like the last decade or so, guiding them to a tournament win and guiding them to a 7 seed, which is the best coaching job that this program has seen since, I'd say, 2008 when Tony Bennett was on campus. So if there's any coach who's got the chops to turn things around, it's Kyle Smith, and especially at a high academic institution like Stanford, where you can't always necessarily get the top recruits, even though Stanford as a program has got some really great recruits in recent years under Jared Haas. But I love the hire. I think Kyle Smith's going to do a great job, and Stanford, I think, got a great coach who's going to make things work, and Smith has shown that he can just absolutely maximize the talent. Gosh, to get a 7 seed out of a Washington State team that was comprised almost entirely of JUCO guys or small college transfers and unheralded freshmen, I think the sky is the limit for a program like Stanford, which at its peak could be very, very good at basketball. So I'm intrigued by both of these moves for both Stanford and Washington, and I think the future is bright with both of these coaches.
Oh, absolutely. I thought that those were 2 tremendous coaching moves made. Vanderbilt getting Mark Byington, I like that as well. And certainly we're going to be taking a wide look during the offseason at all these coaching moves. And right now we've got 100 billion guys in the portal, and at this point, I think that would be easier to make a list of guys that aren't in the transfer portal rather than they are. So we're going to let that sort out a little bit, because we still have Sweet 16 action to dive in on with Eli Boettger, who does such great work over at Heat Check CBB, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And before we dive into these specific matchups, just what do you make out of the Sweet 16 with there really not being a lot of Cinderellas, which obviously captures the attention of many people? But for one, I think it's going to lead to some very high-level basketball. And for two, I'm not sure if you've noticed this with a lot of the matchups, some very contrasting styles that I do think is going to cause for a lot of, shall we say, tempo wars and offensive versus defensive struggles.
I think you set the foundation there perfectly. I of course, love seeing the Cinderella stories. I know that teams like Oral Roberts or St. Peter's that we've seen Florida Atlantic last year, those stories are phenomenal, and we love that in March Madness, and I think it just makes for memorable moments. But at the end of the day, what we have this year is just effectively the 14, 15 or so best teams in college basketball.
And NC State.
And NC State. But even to NC State's credit, since you mentioned them, they've been playing just great basketball. And it's shocking to me, just having watched NC State ever since their ACC tournament run, of how capable a group this looks. It's almost shocking that NC State was as poor as they were during the regular season, because they've got one of the best mismatches in America in DJ Burns. They have some really talented guards and shot makers in DJ Horn, Jaden Taylor. I love what Michael O'Connell's been doing of late. Obviously, Casey Morsell hasn't really been the guy he was expected to be out of high school, but he's still capable of bringing high-level minutes. But I think this team is just, they're finding their groove, and it's shocking that an NC State group that lost, something like 10 of their last 14 games entering the ACC tournament, for them to now turn around and win 7 straight. It's crazy, but at the same time, this just seems like a good basketball team. I think it's interesting what their matchup ahead against Marquette will look like. Obviously, they'll be a sizable underdog, and Marquette has extremely high potential, but is still, I would say, a little bit of a question mark to me. It's a program and it's a team that I haven't been all that high on this season. I feel like they're in their best shape when Cam Jones is getting the basketball a lot, and they kind of defer to Tyler Kolek as more of his true point guard role rather than someone who's going to attack. But it's an intriguing matchup. And I think just overall, the Sweet 16 matchups, they have a ton of different stories here because I think, for one, which is really fascinating, is we have Illinois, currently the number one ranked adjusted offensive efficiency team, against Iowa State, the number one defensive team in the country in terms of adjusted offensive efficiency. So that's a strength on strength battle. And then turning the page to like Alabama against UNC, a couple of high-powered offenses that really like to move and like to go. But imagine the over-under on that one will be
173.5.
There you go. I know you'd have it locked and loaded. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I think the winner's probably going to have to score 85 points or so. Then you have, for example, San Diego State that's trying to knock out the number one overall seed in the Sweet 16 for the second consecutive year after doing it against Alabama last year. And maybe one of the best individual matchups, the whole Sweet 16, is Gonzaga's Graham Ike and whether or not he can slow down Purdue's Zach Edey. So there are absolutely no shortages of storylines. And as much as it would be fun to have, say, Oakland in the Sweet 16, given what Jack Golke did, or maybe Yale or some of these teams, I think what we have is the best teams in college basketball that are going to present some really intriguing individual player matchups and stylistic differences. Honestly, from here on out, obviously the lines are what they are and you can have all the probabilities that you want, but this is really the Sweet 16 and so on is where you can kind of throw the seeds away and it's really just anything can happen because we really don't have, and I know you mentioned NC State, but we really don't have that long shot team that you can just kind of cast aside. I think with every single matchup in this round, maybe save for San Diego State beating UConn, I wouldn't be surprised if any of these results went one way or another. I really think it's that close and the margin's super thin this year.
And you mentioned that game. That is the only game on the board that has a line that is north of 8 right now. As we are recording this, UConn is an 11-point favorite over San Diego State. And just how do you take a look at, for one, this matchup? Because it's a rematch of the title game that we saw a season ago. And two, just this UConn team in general, because they were set up with a rough road. We thought that they might be getting Auburn in this spot. Auburn, they had other ideas against Yale. But that said, I do take a look at this UConn team. And, I mean, you could throw the seeds away and everything like that. But I think that UConn is just proving time and time again. Right now, they are that number one team in college basketball. While they might get a little bit of a rough matchup, what have you, I do think that they've sent a statement thus far that they are still number one. And to take the old Ric Flair mentality, in order to be the man, you've got to beat the man, which is currently UConn.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they're far and away the best team in college basketball this year. But the thing that makes this tournament incredibly special is the best team in college basketball doesn't always win the tournament. And as odd as this sounds, and I know that I'm coming from the perspective of someone who's covered the Mountain West for a very long time, but when you get to the Sweet 16 and beyond, I feel like it comes down so much to individual matchups and stylistic differences between two teams. And if there is one particular situation or setup where UConn could have some issues or could be met with some challenges, is facing off against a defense like San Diego State, because what we have in this situation is a San Diego State team that for years and years has prided itself on defensive intensity and locking up against screens and against off-ball movement. And that's entirely what Connecticut's game is. And they have an extremely diversified offense, to Dan Hurley's credit. There have been some wonderful analysis and assessments of UConn's offense this season, which has just been thoroughly dominant. But the reality of it here is that San Diego State and Brian Dutcher's staff, which is known for their defensive intensity and the way that they can take key players out of the games, they have 4 days of prep against this UConn team to scout, to crunch the film, to gather a game plan. And their hope is to just make this game as messy as possible. And of course, this is going to be pretty close to a true road atmosphere being played in Boston. But if there's any team that really kind of meets the match, at least defensively, against UConn, San Diego State would be on that short list because they have size, they have length, and they have guys that aren't going to be pushed around or intimidated. And for some of these returning players who were on the national title run last year, like Darion Trammell, Lamont Butler, who obviously hit the game winner in the semifinals, and Jaden Ledee, who's ascended into one of the best players in the country, I don't really think that they're too afraid of anything anymore. They might have some revenge and a little bit of a chip on their shoulder after last year's national title game. And they're going to be fueled to make this thing interesting. So it's key for SDSU to just avoid giving up those 12-0 runs, those extended 14-5 runs that UConn just seemingly pulls off against every team that they've played this year. And if they can keep it close, if they can stay within a couple of possessions by, say, the under 8 media timeout in the second half, then I feel like all bets are off and anything can happen from that point. So they just need to keep within striking distance and definitely get some support from guys other than Jaden Ledee, because if it's inconsistent offensive production from Butler or Parrish or Trammell, I just don't really think that San Diego State has the horses and enough offensive firepower to take down what's been one of the best offenses in the country this year.
I agree with you. I've been a little bit disappointed by Trammell along with Butler. I was expecting them to ascend a little bit more this season if they can put it together at just the right time. I think that they can help them hang within single digits, and then from there, as you were alluding to, anything sure can happen, as Eli Boettger does amazing work over at HeCheck CBB, the founder of that great network, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And this is one game that we have yet to really hit, and this is going to be the late game that we are going to be seeing on Thursday. Clemson versus Arizona. Arizona playing right in their neck of the woods, Los Angeles, California. So I can imagine that there's going to be a little bit more red and blue in the stands rather than orange. And right now with Arizona, they're a 7.5-point favorite. How do you take a look at this matchup with an Arizona team that we have seen them have their issues, losing to the likes of Oregon State, losing to the likes of Stanford? And this is a Clemson team that they could flat out shoot it from 3-point range, but the question becomes with Clemson, can they match up on the boards with the likes of Umar Ballo and company? Because that has been really a forte for Arizona that I don't think gets brought up enough.
I think that's a great point. Obviously, I'd give the edge to Arizona in this game. You mentioned the geography here. I think that's a pretty significant advantage for the Wildcats. And Clemson, they're almost like an NC State light to me. For an example, I feel like they kind of limped into the NCAA tournament. They lost their first game in significant fashion in the ACC tournament against a pretty poor Boston College team, and just really didn't pick up many quality wins throughout the season, save for what they did in the early part of the season, and then they also beat North Carolina on the road in early February. But beyond that, they seem to be kind of overwhelmed in a good portion of their matchups, even the ones that they were close towards the end of the game. I just didn't really love their late game execution. Obviously, every game is unique, but if we take Clemson, for example, in this game, how are they going to execute down the stretch if they are able to maintain within distance of Arizona? Are they going to rely on trying to get PJ Hall involved, who's been awesome this season, but he will certainly have some challenging defensive matchups if he has to try to score on guys like Keishad Johnson or Umar Ballo? Or maybe they turn to Joe Girard and let him try to go. But, of course, it's going to be a challenge. And Arizona, to their credit, I know that they've had some early tournament losses under Tommy Lloyd so far after phenomenal regular seasons, but I think what they're really good at doing is they're great at playing their style of basketball. They control the tempo. They know how to get Ballo involved. I think Caleb Love has had a career year, and he's been so difficult to stop. And then a lot of those secondary pieces seem to pitch in quite a bit as well. Guys like Keelan Boswell, who's had a really nice season, and Pella Larson, who's been kind of an X factor for this group. I feel like when Larson is efficient from the field and contributing, I feel like Arizona is really difficult to stop. But as you said, it's been kind of a team that has played to its competition a bit this year. I feel like they elevate when they're playing the best teams. And then, as you mentioned, there have been games where they've fallen sizable fashion to Stanford. They also had the sweep against Washington State, even had that loss against Oregon State. So there are question marks on both sides, but I feel like if Arizona just plays its game, controls its tempo, I'd imagine that they could potentially run away with this one or at least win in pretty comfortable fashion against Clemson.
I think so as well, and we're always comfortable when you're aboard, Eli. You do such great work over at HeCheck CBB. You're the founder of that great network, and I know that you guys are dialed into everything college basketball, not just what we're seeing here in the NCAA tournament, but I know that you're paying attention to all the offseason news, the billion guys that are currently in the transfer portal, and I think that might not be a bad idea. Have a list of guys who aren't in the transfer portal rather than the list of the guys who are, because that list might be a little bit shorter. But that said, let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Absolutely great. Always a pleasure to hop on. You can find our stuff on HeCheckCBB.com. Our social media handles are at HeCheckCBB. And like you said, keeping tabs on the transfer portal, coaching movement, and everything else. And, oh, by the way, we've got Sweet 16 and Elite 8 games this weekend, so obviously can't forget those either.
Absolutely. And Eli, He does such a great job taking a look at this sport that we all know and love all 12 months out of the year. Once the nets are cut down, he's still going to be very hard at work taking a look at the transfer portal, taking a look at what we're going to get during the 2024-25 season, and so much more. So big thanks to Eli for joining me on because he's now part of the Beats and Family podcast. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast to give you picks and analysis on every game for the Sweet 16 on this college basketball Thursday as we hit some bank shots. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Beats and Family podcast. Always great to be joined by Eli Boettger. He does such good work taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Every single time he joins this show, he lends such good insights, and he is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to taking a look at what we're getting this offseason, taking a look at the Sweet 16, jack of all trades that covers this sport all 12 months out of the year. So big thanks to Eli for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this Sweet 16 Thursday as we hit some bank shots.
Most financial establishments close at a certain time, but not here. It is time for a side and total on every game on today's betting board bank shots.
Do note that, as per usual, any changes that are made to these plays will be listed up on my Twitter/X feed at June_D1. We're going to go with the two games out there in the East region first, and then we'll go with the two games in the West region. For some reason, rotation order actually has the later games first. I am not sure why, but you know what? We've got 4 games, so it's easy enough to be able to follow with, and we will start with my DK Network write-up. This is 631-632, Illinois and Iowa State doing battle from Boston, Massachusetts. As you've got Iowa State, a 1.5 point favorite. Your total on this game is anywhere between 146 and 146.5, and right up here is laying the points with Iowa State. I did set them as a 3.5 point favorite. This is a battle of strength on strength. Iowa State, number 2 in all of college basketball in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Illinois, they are the top offense in terms of points scored on a per possession basis and games played away from home, and Illinois is going to have an advantage on glass. This is a top 15 team with regards to rebound rate. You've got of your top 5 scorers, all but one of them giving you at least 5 rebounds per game. The lone exception, Terrence Shannon, gives you 23.5 points, 4 boards, does an amazing job there, but this is an Iowa State team that does a nice job of being able to pressure the 3-point line. I will say, for Illinois, they actually shoot north of 36% from 3-point range away from home, compared to 33.5% at home. I thought that was a little bit striking, but Iowa State away from home, they allow opponents to only shoot about 32.5% from 3, and the big thing for Iowa State, they win the turnover battle time and time again. This team is ranked in the top 70 in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis. They are number 2 in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, and while they might not have the scoring of someone like a Terrence Shannon, Taman Lipsby, along with Keyshawn Gilbert, these are guys that combine for a little bit over 26 points per contest, 9 boards, 9 assists, 4.5 steals between the two of them, and then you've got Milan Mimosilovic, who's able to give you 11 points, shoots 36% from 3-point range, and for Iowa State, while they certainly aren't as strong on the offensive side of things as Illinois, I feel like when you take the two weaknesses of these two teams, Iowa State, their strength is defense, Illinois, their strength is offense. I feel like the Iowa State offense is better than that of the Illinois defense, and that is bared out by the numbers. For Iowa State, this is a top 50 team in all of college basketball in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Meanwhile, Illinois, in a road/neutral court setting, they are 252nd in all of college basketball in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage, 261st in points allowed per possession in games played away from home as well. I think that is going to be a big deterrent in this one to Illinois. It's an Illinois team that I think is going to be able to take care of the ball better than most teams do against Iowa State. Illinois overall for the season, they're turning the ball over about 11 times per contest, with Marcus Domas, the triple-double that he had in the first game of the NCAA tournament, really being big, and Dane Danger does a relatively solid job in limited minutes down low. Luke Goody has been able to help out as well, but I do think that Iowa State going to be able to get just enough on the glass with the about 5.5 or so rebounds per game of Trey King to be able to hold up there and get the job done. I like the defense in this spot. My write-up is going to be on Iowa State laying the number, and I did set my total 145.5, so here at 146.5, fully recognize the over is 22-4 in Illinois' last 26 6 games. I do think that Iowa State gets their style in this game, though. So I'm going to be taking a look at the under and my right up. That is laying the number here with Iowa State. Willing to lay up to 3 with them. 633, 634 on the betting board. UConn is going to be playing against San Diego State. San Diego State does find themselves as an underdog of 11 points. Total on this game is between 135 and 136, and circumstance where I feel like the number's gotten up a little bit too lofty. I was willing to take any sort of double figures here with San Diego State right now, seeing the slide at 9.5. I'm going to be willing to take those points. It is a San Diego State unit that is really going to need to try to bog this game down and try to really have their defense be able to play out. You've got Jaden Ledee, who's going to have a little bit of a tough time down low. You've got Giant of the Earth Donovan Clingan, who's been able to do such a good job with 2+ blocks, 6.5 to 7 rebounds per game. He's just an absolute load, but Ledee has really been one of the best out players here this season in college basketball. 21.5 points, 8.5 boards, and then for San Diego State, the big key is, what are you going to be able to get out of those guys that were in the national title game 8 seasons ago? Lamont Butler, along with also Darian Trammell. These two guys, they've only been able to register a combined 17.5 or so points per contest. Both guys have struggled from 3-point range, combining to shoot about 31.5%, but they do give you north of 6 assists, the fewer than 3 turnovers per game, so they do keep things relatively clean there. It's a San Diego State offense that certainly is just not going to be able to match up with UConn. UConn, in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, this is creme de la creme in all of college basketball. Number one, you've got two guys that just really take over a game, and Cam Spencer and his 3-point shooting being at 44% while supplying 14.5 points, 4.5 boards, 3.5 assists, and then Tristan Newton is a triple-double machine, 15 points, 7 boards, 6 assists per contest. But San Diego State, top 30 team in all of college basketball in terms of opponent's 3-point shooting percentage. It's been a San Diego State defense that has been able to do a relatively solid job of being able to travel all season long. In terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, San Diego State, number 30 in all of college basketball. They do give up about 10 points more per 100 possessions when they leave home rather than when they are at home, and this is a Connecticut team that's 8th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and fully recognize that out there in Boston, they're going to have the crowd behind them, but when they are away from the great state of Connecticut, they are giving up about 15.5 points more per 100 possessions than they do at home. I do think that San Diego State is going to do a nice job of being able to protect the ball. You're going to need to get a few threes made by Micah Parrish and company, but I do think that San Diego State going to be able to hold in this game. They are going to have revenge on their mind from last season as well, so I did set my line at a 9.5. I'm going to be willing to take the 11 here with San Diego State, and did set my total at a 135.5, between 135 and 136. Personally, I would rather take the 136 under rather than the 135 over. You got a San Diego State team as well outside the top 200 in terms of total possessions per game, and I do think that they're going to do everything possible to make this thing bowling ball shoe ugly. So you're at the 136. I like the under and the points with San Diego State. Now let's hit the two games out west. 635, 636. It is North Carolina and Alabama doing battle from Crypto.com Arena, and North Carolina is a 4.5 point favorite. Total on this game 173.5. Perhaps Alabama got it through their skulls that, hey, it's not illegal to play defense. They play that game against Grand Canyon. They do a nice job being able to get the job done. And I do think that even though you're going to get a lot of possessions in this game, we're going to see a little bit more defense. I set my total at 169. I do like the under, as this North Carolina team has really been able to do a nice job of being able to be up. When you take a look at defenses, you don't want to just take a look at the amount of points allowed. You want to take a look at the amount of points allowed per possession. And North Carolina, 22nd in the country, there's points allowed on a per possession basis, but if you look at them in just a roadside shoot court setting, it's a top 15 defense in all of college basketball, and that is a big reason why I did place them as a favorite of 5 points. I am going to be willing to lay the number with North Carolina. Harrison Ingram, Armando Bacot, being able to give you a combined 19 rebounds per game is going to be very instrumental in this game. And for Alabama, you've got Grant Nelson, who is able to give you about 5.5 to 6 rebounds per game. And Aaron Action Estrada is a nice player. Double-figure scorer. He gives you about 4.5 boards, 4.5 assists. Does a nice job of being able to contribute in a wide variety of ways, but they just don't compare to what you're able to get down low out of this North Carolina team. North Carolina, in terms of their overall rebound rate, they're number 12 in all of college basketball. And for Alabama, the whole is greater than some of its parts approach. Actually, it's not been too bad. They're actually 43rd in all of college basketball in terms of their overall rebound rate. And for Alabama, this team does a relatively solid job of being able to take care of the ball, despite the fact that they just absolutely run it and gun it. They're a top 100 team in terms of ball protection against a North Carolina unit that, in general, they're not going to force a lot of turnovers, but North Carolina 22nd in all of college basketball in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis. They do a nice job of being able to keep things clean, with RJ Davis being able to give you about 21.5 points per contest. And then you've got guys like Cormac Ryan that are able to step up. Now Mark Sears, I think that he can actually match the scoring that you get with Davis. He's able to give you 21.5 points per contest, and has been a nice takeover player. And for Alabama, the one thing that they've actually done done very well on defenses guard the three-point arc. They're actually 37th in the country with this regard now. It does go up to 34.6% in terms of opponent's three-point shooting percentage away from home. That compares to 28% at home. But North Carolina, they also do a nice job of shutting down the three-point line, and that's the bread and butter for Alabama. They're one of the just highest teams in general in terms of percentage of shots that come from three-point range. North Carolina, in a road/neutral court setting, they're allowing opponents to shoot 29.9% from three-point range. That's the top 15 mark in all of college basketball. I think that is going to be the undoing of Alabama. As a result, I did set my total 169. I think that those brick threes help you out with the under. And with North Carolina, willing to lay up to 4.5 with them, set them as a 5-point favorite, and we wrap things up with 637, 638 on the board. Arizona is going to be playing against Clemson. Clemson finds themselves in most spots as a 7.5-point underdog, still seeing some sevens out there, and your total on this game, it is 152. This was an opener of 6.5, and personally, I did take this a little bit earlier when it was more in the 6.5 to 7 range. I did set my line at 7.5, so if you've got a 7.5, I would say shop the line, try to see if you're able to get down to about a 7 or so, because I am on Arizona in this spot, but I just wouldn't be willing to lay anything north of 7 in this ordeal. It is an Arizona team that is just absolutely dominant on the glass, top 5 team in all of college basketball in terms of their rebound rate, and this Clemson team, to their credit, they've been able to do a solid job as well. PJ Hall has been very dominant for this team as he's able to supply you with 18.5 points. He's able to give you 7+ rebounds per game, and Ian Shefflin is actually your top rebounder. He's been able to give you 9.5 rebounds per game. He's done a solid job for a Clemson team that, in terms of their overall rebound rate, they're 53rd in all of college basketball, but they just don't have anyone that's going to be able to truly match up with Umar Ballo, who's been able to average a double-double this year for an Arizona team that's number 3 in all of college basketball in terms of rebound rate. We were talking about with Eli Boettger for Arizona. This is right out there in their backyard, out there in Los Angeles, California, and we got Caleb Love, who has been feeling the love all season long. 18 points, 3.5 assists. Not necessarily the most amazing three-point shooter at 34.5%, but has been much more consistent than he has been in past years, and he's got so many good supporting players around him, as you've got Kylan Boswell, Bill Larson, along with Kashad Johnson, throw in there as well, Jaden Bradley. They all shoot at least 38.5% from three-point range, and this is a Clemson team that really has struggled with their defense all season long. Outside the top 125 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis for Clemson, they're about 128th in the country in terms of opponents' three-point shooting percentage. They have not been too bad there, and that is the one weakness that you do have for Arizona in a road or neutral court setting. They do allow opponents to shoot 34% from three-point range. You've got Joe Girard for this Clemson team doing a nice job supplying 15.5 points, shooting 41.5% from three-point range, but what are you going to be able to get out of someone like a Mr. Chase Hunter, who gives you about 33% three-point shooting? That bogs down to 30.5% away from home, 12.5 points per contest, but has been very impactful recently. Clemson does a very good job of being able to protect the ball. They only turn the ball over about 10 times per contest. They don't really force any ball pressure, though, as well, and that'll allow Arizona to operate the way that they typically do. It's an Arizona team that's been able to regain their offense going into the NCAA tournament. They had scored 70 points for fear in each of their last 3 games, 85 and 78 points first 2 games. I think that gets them right back online, and this has been a Clemson defense that has been very leaky. First 2 games of the NCAA tournament looked very solid, but I attribute that a little bit to New Mexico just laying a turd in general, and I do think that this is going to be a little bit of a higher scoring affair, and I do think that Arizona finds a way to be able to win from within. I do think that the guard play is just a little bit too explosive, and I just like the overall size that you've got with these guards as well. You've got so many interchangeable pieces for Arizona. They're able to dole out the ball, along with Love giving you about 3.5 assists per contest. Pell Larson, Kylan Boswell, they also give you north of 3.5 assists per game. Having 3 main ball handlers, I think is going to be too much for Clemson. I'm going to be willing to lay up to 7 with Arizona, and did set my total more around a 155.5. So circumstance where you're at the 152, I like the over, and with Arizona, not willing to lay anything north of 7, but willing to lay 7 with them, and that'll wrap things up for the Thursday edition of Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one or 2 ways we will fire those in. First one is my Twitter /X timeline at GN_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline, and the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated, and then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via the 5-star review, and a big thanks to Eli Boettger, who does tremendous work over at Check CBB, for joining me in the last segment, coming at you guys every single day throughout the college basketball season, and that means I'm with you once again tomorrow. Thank you so much for tuning in.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.